Amy Friesen.
Hello, Kimothy Walker.
I'm in your backyard.
I see that. How did you get there?
Well, I got here because and before we talk to our friend about a very difficult topic, I wanted to thank you. Um, I don't think I've ever had a friend like you. So what I wanted to
Hold on for the ride. Sucker.
hanging on like it's a effing roller coaster. So for our listeners, Buddy went missing at a campsite in West Ottawa. And like he does this, he roams around. We've been to the deserts of Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and beaches of California, and he never goes outside of a perimeter. So I was on the phone with Amy and I looked down and Buddy was gone. Not a really big deal because like I said, he kind of goes in. It didn't take me long to realize he was really gone. And you have a friend when she basically says to you, "We're on our way." So the happy news, because let me just show you. There he is. He's grounded, obviously. But the happy news is that he came back, but not before I was in my car. I was searching. I had some teenagers in the campground looking, and then Amy and her husband and her daughter showed up, and he had just arrived home. I was bawling my face off, like because I mean, there's coyotes and all kinds of other things that we have covered, and the little asshole was sitting beside the car, which was still running because I was looking all over the neighborhood, just sitting beside the car, barking his head off. And I was beside myself. So I am here for all of you out there in our mental health world who have that friend. She's that friend. And I slept here last night so that I could get my shit together. And I was terrified, like literally terrified that my dog had been eaten by a coyote because we were in some very exposed part of the city that we live in. And Amy, I couldn't be more delighted that it's you that I get to talk about mental health with.
Well, thank you. Isn't that lovely? I would say though, also, I mean, we have talked about doing a show on pets
Yep.
and the amount of emotions and mental health that goes in and around also losing a pet, even if it's for 20 minutes. Like it just, the amount that we're attached to our pets is ample. I mean, I have four and yeah, it's
And they're
amazing.
they're they're all here. I got all of them. Well, I don't have the cats, but I think that we should do that because I know so many people because I do van life. I know so many people who travel with their animals and it's their everything. I've also lost four among the worst days of my life. I don't want to compare, but you know, just after I lost a parent, I lost a dog, so that kind of amplifies things a little bit. Um, and I think it's an important show that we do because for a lot of people, this is their person. And I think it's really important. And when I yesterday lost for a short period of time, this guy, I honestly like for a mental health reason, as you know, I've had a lot of loss. I don't cry often. And as you know, I was bawling my face off because a lot of things is like what led to his end? Where did he go? Does he have a broken leg somewhere? I was like bawling my face off. And in fact, I actually took that as a good sign and that I didn't think that I could cry anymore. I just thought I've had so much shit and abuse that I thought I can't cry. And I was like walking along these pathways, bawling my face off, trying to call his name. And I think that that's a really important thing. So I think in the future, we should look for an expert in um, what animals mean to us because there are some people that don't have pets and they don't understand.
Yeah.
And I don't understand them. Quite honestly, if you don't have a pet and you don't understand grief and loss, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to kind of, be simpatico. And it was devastating. And you were there. And that is the kind of friend that we should all be.
Those fuzzy bastards, they get us every time.
I know.
I
And
tell you.
I've got two of yours right here. Actually, let me show you. Okay, so
Now
friend
she's there. She's messing up my setting and
is
everything.
one, and there's Sigmund,
Sigmund
and
after his knee
the two cats
surgery.
aren't there. And so the conversation that we're about to have is with a very dear friend of mine. And I've told you repeatedly now that I'm in your house for a little bit while I recover from that trauma, this is going to be a hard one. It's going to be a hard one. So
Yeah,
thank you for being up to the task. Because when I proposed her as a guest, this is not a subject that gets discussed very often, and it's going to be tough.
right.
Yep.
Well, without further ado, we'll go next to our guest.
Yep. Wow, I have been in traditional and social media for 35 years, and I have never met a woman like this. My friend, my confidant, and a leader in a topic that is going to be really hard today. Really hard. We're talking about um, sexual abuse by a sibling. And Nancy Morris is the leader in this internationally. She's making incredible um, partnership arrangements with people around the world who have this. And I remember Nancy once saying to me, this is the last frontier. I mean, we've talked about Me Too, we've talked about sexual abuse. As many of you know, I was one of the first people in Canada that spoke out about being sexually assaulted by a stranger. And that's kind of how I met Nancy, but also I helped her with her business. And Nancy Morris is here today to talk about the last frontier. And she is bold and brave. And I love her to pieces. And she is also a survivor. Welcome, Nancy, to this very difficult conversation.
Well, it's a great pleasure to see you again, Kimothy, and to be here with you too, Amy, and to discuss this topic. It is a difficult topic, but it is one that we need to be talking about because if we don't talk about it, there's no way we can intervene with those people who are currently experiencing SSA or sibling sexual abuse, and there's certainly no way that we can prevent it. And if we can't have honest and direct conversations about it, it's just not going to change. So it's a joy to be here.
So, uh, two questions right off the bat. You are a survivor of this, so can you please tell us what happened to you? And the second part of that is why did you decide to speak out? Because this is a super taboo subject. So, what happened to you, and why speak out?
Well, many years ago, sort of way back, nearly 100 years ago, when I was just a child, my oldest brother sexually assaulted me. And now I use that word because it's my decision to use that word. Other people will use different words to describe it. It's one of the challenges about sibling sexual abuse. The term abuse or assault, many people don't like it. I use it because that's what it was to me. I felt I was being assaulted. And this would be a situation where he would come into my room late at night when I was asleep or when he thought I was asleep. There was never a case of intercourse or anything like that, but there was fondling and groping and these other things. He never said a word, but he would come into the room. I never knew when it was going to happen. I don't totally remember how old I was, but I think I was about 7 or 8 when it first started. So he would have been quite young, 11 or 12, when it first started. And, it was a difficult thing to wrap my head around because I didn't know what the hell was going on. And that's one of the challenges for the child who is experiencing abuse or assault from a sibling is you're so young you don't really know what's going on. So the whole story would take up this whole episode, so I don't want to go into that. It's on my own podcast, the Siblings 2 podcast. I go into it in more detail. But suffice to say, it was a situation where, like I said, I never knew when it was going to happen. And I never knew when he was going to come in my room. He didn't do anything at any other time. It would just be some random night in the middle of the night he would come into my room. I know the experiences of others. They, could have happened in the day. It could have happened in another part of the house or somewhere outside of the house or whatever. For me, it was he would come into my room late at night. So that's how that happened. And why did I decide to speak out? Well, I've always spoken about my experiences since I was 20 years old. I told a therapist that I had back then when my mom passed away at 20. I saw a therapist after that. And after a few sessions of talking about grief, this came out. Unexpectedly to me, it sort of tumbled out of my mouth. And he was really good. And he was helped me to understand quite a few parts of it. So I've been talking about this within my circle and with a few closer professionals for like 40 years. But I recognized, and I've always recognized, that it's not talked about in society, just like we didn't talk about abuse in the church, and we didn't talk about abuse in sports teams, and we didn't talk about abuse by, people at university and, all that sort of stuff. This was certainly not being talked about. So I thought about it a long time, but I hesitated because I have my own family and I was worried about what it might do to what's left of my family, which in my case is just two brothers. My parents are gone and all the rest of it. But it was the only family I had. So what was, other than my husband and stepkids, it was sort of like, what's going to happen if I open my mouth to this dysfunctional but only family I know sort of thing.
Okay, but sorry. So what did happen? Like, where is this brother now and what did happen?
So when I was getting married back in 2007, I actually in 2006 I had brought it up to both of my brothers individually. Then we had a phone conversation in late 2006 where my older brother admitted some things to my other brother, who is the middle child. I'm the youngest. He admitted some stuff, but he admitted it sort of like, yeah, Nancy, and now you should get over it. It was that sort of attitude. Cheekily, it's episode 2 of my own podcast, is a verbatim reenactment of that conversation. But so that was 2006. And then it just sort of hung out there and did nothing. When I was getting married in 2007, I was concerned about having my older brother at the wedding for 2 reasons. First, because some of my friends might have punched him. But second, many of my friends would have just been polite, shaken his hand. My fiance, my now husband, probably would have done that. I don't think he would have punched him. But do you know what I mean? And I couldn't deal with that. And we know, and I know now, that one of the hardest things about sibling sexual abuse is it's not only the abuse, but it's the damage that occurs with the everyday exposure to the person who's causing the abuse. And later in life, it's when you have to go to family events like weddings and funerals and all these sorts of things, and you're facing this adult abuser. So I said to him, I don't want you to come to the wedding. Your wife and kids can come if they want. The next day, I got an email from him saying, none of us are coming. And that's the last I spoke to him in 2007. My other brother is, we still communicate, but we've always been a little bit estranged, the whole family. But my other brother and I still communicate and get along well. So
And
that's great. He
you never
walked me
had it,
down the
you
aisle,
never had him
actually.
charged. He was not charged?
He was not charged.
Okay.
I misspoke. My brother didn't walk me down the aisle. He was at my wedding, though, and gave great speeches and made everybody laugh. But no, my oldest brother was never charged. Interestingly, I could still have him charged now because there's no statute of limitations in Canada for sexual assault. That being said,
Why didn't you have him charged?
well, a number of factors. First, he even if he was found guilty, he would be penalized as if he was a teenager. So nothing basically would happen. Let's sum it up that way. And also, I have a degree of empathy for my brother because he was a child too. And he screwed up badly. He made very bad decisions. And he's made bad decisions as an adult for basically ignoring this situation. But I don't think the 12-year-old meant to harm me the way that he did. And I think this is one of the most important things we need to remember is that in many, not all, but in many situations of sibling sexual abuse, the one causing the harm has no clue what they're doing. They know it's wrong, That's why it's done in secret or in hiding, but they don't understand the damage. They don't understand consequences. How many 12 and 13-year-old, especially boys, understand consequences of anything, for God's sake, let alone something like this, right? I mean, even I as a female, when I was a teenager, I had no clue what my behavior was doing or potentially doing to other people. Do you know what I mean? Like you don't understand it. So I have a degree of empathy for my oldest brother. I don't agree with him. I have no desire to see him, any of that sort of stuff. But if he needed a kidney, I'd give him mine if I could.
So, yeah, and sorry, Amy, I just keep jumping in, but
Pause the screen.
as you both know, the guy that got me was 19 years old, and I was told by my 8 or 9 year old friend, don't worry about, I'll never forget this till the day I die. Don't worry about it. He does it to me all the time. Is there an age, Nancy, that you actually do know effing better? Is
Well,
there?
yeah, I know what you're saying there. And yes, I mean, when you're dealing with particularly if the abuse starts a little bit later when somebody's 14, 15, 16, 17, you are leaning into something that's more abusive that we would approach a little bit differently. But if somebody who's causing the harm is 12, 13, 10, and there are cases of 10-year-olds causing sexual harm to a sibling, and there are cases of boys harming their younger brothers, their younger sisters, girls harming their younger sisters, their younger brothers, but more often than not, it's an older brother to younger sister sort of thing. So that's the most common. But yeah, when you're talking about somebody who's 19, who's effectively an adult, that is different. And criminal justice would step in probably quite quickly on that one. Whereas when you're looking at a family where the dynamic is the kids are a lot younger, that's not usually the first port of call is not usually criminal justice. The protection of the survivor is utmost. That is top of the line. That has to be and is the number one concern. But research is showing that, just to have social services step in and remove all the kids from the household, which is the way it was originally dealt with and sometimes still is not necessarily the way to do it and is not necessarily what needs to happen. Even in my own case, I wouldn't have wanted my older brother removed from the home. I would just want the behavior to stop. In many respects, we were the quintessential small town Alberta family. And this is another myth that's out there, is that sibling sexual abuse only happens in quote unquote that type of family, the wrong side of the tracks or whatever you want to call it. When I know instances of, sibling sexual abuse happening in your quintessential, professional parent, household 2.4 kids, white picket fence, where the word dysfunction would not necessarily be, used to describe that family. Incidents of sibling sexual abuse may occur more in households that are quite fractured, but it can occur in any home, in any country, any race, any religion, any demographic, any psychographic, any socioeconomic status. It's all over the world to the tune of millions of children. Even in the Ottawa-Gatineau area, using numbers that have come out of recent international research, like what they call a scoping review, where they review all sorts of different types of research from around the world, the average number or the average percentage of children who will be harmed by a sibling is anywhere from 2.5 to 5% conservatively. These are numbers that are easy to verify, and that as we know with most sexual situations, the underreporting is quite high. Let's go with a nice 2.5 conservative percentage points for the Ottawa Gatineau area, which has a population of 1.3 million. So again, on average, you've got 17 to 20% of any population being children under the age of 18. That means in Ottawa Gatineau, you're looking at approximately 7,000 children today who are being abused by a sibling, and another 6,000 who are the ones causing harm. So conservatively, we're getting close to three-quarters full at CTC. That's the children directly involved. That doesn't include the parents. It doesn't include other siblings who are not being abused. It doesn't include any of that. And then
Is
if
there
you take the number of, say, 13,000, and because of how people age, pardon the expression, in and out of this situation, every 10 years that number rolls over again. So in my lifespan in the city of Ottawa, over 100,000 children have either been harmed or were harmed, or were harming their sibling. And there's millions of adults who are listening into this right now who have never told anybody, except
that's
for maybe their spouse.
that is wild. Is there a concern? Is it a myth or an actual thing? Is it their concern for the 10, 11, 12 year olds, for instance, who are a part of this and are the perpetrators, I guess, the assaultee or assaulters,
Person who
uh,
causes harm
person who causes
is
harm?
the neutral statement
Thank
for
you.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
The person who causes harm. Is it a myth or is it something that might happen where they also may grow up to be someone who continues this type of behavior?
What's known as the recidivism rate. So the behaviors being repeated over and over again
Mm.
is very low in sibling sexual abuse, as far as research shows. That
Hmm.
being said, research is limited. But what you find is when the person who's causing harm hits 15, 16, 17, they all of a sudden start realizing that what they're doing is wrong and it's very harmful, and the behavior stops. And I know of instances where those young people then become adults, and because they have remorse and guilt and shame, just like the person who's been harmed, for example, because they have these impacts, they don't get married. They don't have children because they think they're perverted or there's something deviant about them. And they have really significant impacts because they've recognized that their behavior was wrong as they matured as young teenagers. So
Interesting.
it is, of course, it happens. There are people who perpetrate sibling sexual abuse, and I'm using those terms very specifically as almost a learning ground, quote unquote, for adult predatory behavior, for
Mm.
sure. But that percentage, based on the research that's out there at the moment, is really low because there's a lot of people in therapy and or young people who, they when this gets disclosed, for example, or when it's found out in a family and they go into therapy, the children are learning that what they've done is so wrong, and they really had no clue in their head, right?
Mm.
Like no clue. It was wrong, yes, but the amount of damage that they might be creating, even for themselves, was beyond them. They didn't understand it. So if somebody, for example, is currently causing harm at the age of 13 and 14, they know it's wrong, but they don't think it's quote unquote harmful. They hit 20, and then they realize, oh my God, I have sexually assaulted a sibling. Then all those impacts come in. We know the impacts for the person who's been harmed, for the child who was assaulted. We have all sorts of teen suicide, teen homelessness because they run away from home. Go ask a bunch of them. There's a direct line between SSA and teen homelessness. Addictions, interpersonal relationship problems, anxiety, depression, PTSD, complex PTSD, all of these sorts of other things. And we see it in those people who caused harm as well when they realize what they've done.
So, Nancy, can I just ask you, I feel like, if this was CSI Miami, right, this would be a completely different conversation because things get escalated in that situation. How did you forgive
My
your,
brother?
well, the perpetrator of this? How did you work through this? Because obviously you didn't do it through criminal justice.
No.
How did you work through it?
That's a great question. And I have given it a lot of thought. You're not the first person to ask me, but I think my answer changes over time. So I'm now in my 60s. So, I've had a long, long time to work this through. And I think, when I was younger, I didn't forgive him, but I didn't want to deal and was afraid of what would happen if I spoke out. Then, as I got a little bit older, I didn't care anymore what would happen if I spoke out. And sort of around that same sort of time, I began to realize that, as I said before, he was a child as well and made really stupid decisions. Should I um, think of him as a sexual abuser for my entire life and his entire life? And I came to the decision that no, I shouldn't. He screwed up. And then, because of a lack of courage, a lack of self esteem, whatever you want to call it, he couldn't step up to the plate when I was asking him in 2006 to acknowledge what he'd done and to recognize the behavior. To me, I kind of feel sorry for him because he can't step up to the plate. And sort of my forgiveness isn't based on feeling sorry for him, but I'm, you know, part of forgiveness is setting myself free from the expectation that he's going to do better,
Mhm.
and just realize that I didn't do anything wrong. So the first person I had to forgive was myself. I didn't do anything wrong because, of course, you take it on board yourself. Quite often, particularly when you are living with your abuser and they're around you all the time, you're sort of, taking part of it on yourself. And I had to forgive myself, and I had to forgive myself for not saying anything to my parents when they were alive, saying anything to anybody whenever. But we are talking the late 1960s when this first started. There was barely sex education in the Catholic school I went to, let alone a conversation about sibling sexual abuse. And for me personally, if they installed one paragraph about sibling sexual abuse and sex education now, you would see the numbers plummet, I believe, because the child being harmed would then understand that no, no, this doesn't happen in every house like you think when you're growing up. And the person causing the harm would recognize that perhaps they would perhaps recognize younger that the behavior that they're imparting on another person is extremely harmful. And, kids don't know how their brains work. Young boys and girls don't recognize it. Just because you have a thought about something doesn't mean you have to go act it out. And there are other ways of learning about yourself and your feelings and your emotions and your, puberty growth and all of these sorts of things, that you don't have to go act stuff out on other people. But there isn't even a paragraph in any sex education stuff that I've ever read and found. And I've, of course, as you sort of said, I've been talking with people all over the world. Zilch. Nothing. I was even on, and this was a while ago, so I don't know about currently, on Canada's children's helpline website. And I was looking around. Granted, I didn't go through every page, so I'm giving them a bit of a pass here. But when I went to the section for parents' information on sexual abuse, the only information I could find was on adult to child abuse, and mostly like stranger or whatever, even family, but adult to child. No peer to peer, like teenager to teenager abuse, and certainly no sibling sexual abuse was mentioned. And this is on the Children's Helpline website for parents. I
Mm.
found a number of years ago a pamphlet that the title is Sibling Sexual Abuse, a Family's Guide, or a Parent's Guide, sorry, a Parent's Guide, published in Canada. It's on the Canada.ca website in an obscure back corner somewhere that even the researchers I know internationally had never found it. It was published in 2008. I know no parent who's ever seen it. And it's a
Wild.
very good pamphlet. It talks about, what sexual abuse is versus normal sexual curiosity between siblings versus problematic behavior. It talks about all of that. It talks about some of the factors that may contribute to it, like, parentizing the oldest child, making the oldest child have more responsibility, and therefore the younger children don't feel like they can speak out, all of these different sorts of things. And it could be updated now, but it's a really good pamphlet, and nobody I've know has ever read it. And it's on a website,
That's wild.
isn't it?
I mean, lots of the stuff we talk about here as well, like it just to your point, doesn't get a lot of airtime. Like it's just people are dealing with this stuff. Lots of people are dealing with it, and you just cannot find information around it, which is just wild to me. Um, I know a lot of people that are watching may not have disclosed or may think something's up or whatnot. I don't expect children are watching this, but past experiences.
Yeah.
When you talked to your brothers in 2006,
Six.
2007, yeah. How did your other brother react to on taking that information?
Well, he reacted better than I thought he would in many respects, but he's a diplomat and he's the middle child, and I don't mean like he's not a professional diplomat, but he likes to,
Like a
he
piece.
tries to take a balanced approach to things. He was not pleased about this whole situation. He was less than pleased, if I could say that. But I recognize that he did find himself in a difficult situation. Personally, I would have loved it if he would have cut off all contact with my older brother, blah, blah, blah. But that's generally not going to happen. And it doesn't happen with parents either. And, in with disclosure, sometimes the disclosure piece is the part that hurts the survivor more than anything else, even the abuse. Because when they disclose either as a child or as an adult, they're not believed or they're not prioritized. So, what often happens, and I've seen this in some of the narratives that I've collected through my own research, is the person who has caused the harm gets the intervention, but the survivor doesn't, or something along those lines. So with my own brother, he has always since disclosure found himself in a difficult situation because he's got to acknowledge for himself that his sister was abused by his brother. You know what I mean? And it's hard to wrap your head around someone abusing a sibling anyway, but then to say, oh, the person that did it is my own brother as well.
Right.
That's really tough. It's what we call the double dilemma for parents as well. They must admit that one of their children has been abused or assaulted, or some bad behavior has occurred, some really inappropriate or problematic behavior has occurred by one of their other children who they also love. So it's called the sort of double dilemma, is that parents got to wrap their head around that. And that sometimes that's a big ask for people. And to be honest with you, many parents have been abused themselves in one form or another, or have experienced some sort of mental health trauma in one form or another. So somebody's disclosing something to them, even their adult child is disclosing it, and all of their own trauma comes to the surface. And sometimes their immediate response is, oh, you're blowing it out of proportion, it was just natural curiosity, or oh, you must have misunderstood, or do you know what I mean? So their response, and this is something I think particularly survivors need to understand, more often than not, their response is an indication of their own trauma.
Yeah.
And actually, Nancy, I wanted to ask you about that. Is there a correlation in your research between parents who have been abused and maybe not seeing it in the family because they've got their own shit that they're dealing with? And is there any kind of straight line between that?
I think the academic research is limited, but we sort of know that yes, when you've experienced your own traumas, either you don't see other people's, or you're still dealing with, say, your own PTSD or whatever, so you're a bit blocked on everything else, or it brings up so much trauma in you that you can't deal with the other person. So it becomes a denial state. So yes, it is. The research in sibling sexual abuse has really accelerated in the last 3 to 5 years, but
Yeah.
it's still limited on certain things. So I know of one woman actually at McGill in Montreal. She is a social worker and PhD candidate doing research on the impact of child sexual abuse on non-abused, non-abusive siblings. So the siblings who weren't involved at all. And I think, and I don't remember the numbers, she's been on my podcast a couple of times. I don't remember the numbers, but I think we're looking at the number of research papers on this very specific but really important topic is less than 10. Now, for those who don't know this, in academia, there'll be 20 papers published today on a single topic. So we're talking about a topic that's, less than 10 papers ever.
Okay.
But though the research shows, for example, the non-abused, non-abusive siblings, they quite often know that something is either going on or has gone on, or they had their suspicions, but they didn't know how to deal with it. So they have guilt, they have trauma, and they have vicarious emotions and all these sorts of other things that are going on. It's really important work that needs to be done, but again, this sort of indicates how much more research we need to do. But the research won't come until society goes, we need to stop this. We need to understand this. And they won't do that because of all the myths and all the shame and all the taboo around something as quote unquote ugly as sibling sexual abuse.
Well, I mean, let me ask you, when would we introduce this topic? Like, is it in sex ed in grade 9? Is it in elementary school? Is it in junior high school?
Yep.
Again, I know in some provinces we don't have junior high school, but I went to junior high school in Manitoba. When is the appropriate time to tell a 12 or 13-year-old boy or girl, I would
Yep.
imagine,
Yep.
that you don't do this shit, man?
Yeah.
Like, when does that message get out?
Well, that's a really great question. And I've got like a couple of things to share on that. First, I've had now 3 international siblings 2 days. That's April 15th every year is an international event I have
Oh,
for
okay.
raising awareness and talking about this. And I interviewed a couple of people in Australia who are leaders in this, Dale Tolliday and Russ Pratt. Russ Pratt said, um, to me in 2023, and I give him the credit for this, and I tell him because it's so smart. If you have not talked to your kids about pornography before the age of 10, you're too late.
What?
So, yeah.
Oh,
What?
I
Yep.
got chills.
Yep.
Oh,
So the that gives us an idea of when we need to be talking to our children about this sort of stuff. So it's before 12 or 13.
that's wild.
Nusrat Khan is the leader of an organization in India called the Cactus Foundation. In India, you can expect almost 50% of children to be abused, sexually abused.
Sorry, 50.
50, usually adult to child. Yeah, 50, adult to child. So her organization, Cactus Foundation, does education of families, of school teachers, of professionals dealing with children, of all sorts of people around CSA, child sexual abuse, its prevention, and all that sort of stuff. She again was on my siblings 2 day. She advocates and teaches people how to start talking to their children when they're 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, using real names of body parts and how to respect the body and all of these sorts of things. Her daughter is just a little champion. You'd love her, Kimothy, and you would too, Amy. But Kimothy, you'd love this girl. She's now like 14. She's known as a child warrior. She's one of the teachers. So she goes into schools because who's going to listen to which kid? They're going to listen to another kid. So her
Mm.
daughter Sahir is in schools teaching this stuff to children, and she's also teaching parents. She will go right up to a parent and say, "When are you going to get your eyes out of the ground and start paying attention and learning what's going on and all that sort of stuff?" So, but the other thing I think is really important is, yes, it needs to be in sex education, appropriate language and everything, very young, woven into that. In the same way that we start talking to children about, your body and consent and who can touch your body and who can't touch your body. We don't say, your uncle and your aunt and the stranger danger and your brother Bob. None of these people can touch you. We don't include and your brother or your sister, and we should be doing that. But one thing that I think is missing from the conversation about this is we don't teach children to respect their siblings generally.
Mm.
It's not it's it, you know and this is, I know this for myself as a step parent. I'll say bad things about my brothers in front of my stepkids. So I'm not sort of displaying respect for my siblings, if you know what I mean. So why should, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not modeling respect. And the sibling relationship is the longest relationship you're going to have in your life, good, bad, and ugly. It's the longest relationship. So even when one of my brothers lived in Canada, I lived in Europe, and the other one lived in Indonesia, they were still in my head. They are the longest relationship of my life, from when I'm born to when I die. So that we don't value the sibling relationship the way that we used to. Oh, well, pardon me.
Sorry, you're talking to an only child here, so
I know.
I'm gonna pass this off to Amy because I don't know anything about having siblings.
And to Nancy's point before, if we get down this road, we're going to be down there for a while. So we're
Yeah.
just going to bypass mine. But you know, it's
But,
interesting, Nancy, as well as I remember when I was younger, up until my friends started having kids, which a lot of them started much before like they had kids much earlier than I did. Um, it was really interesting because you mentioned like naming body parts, what they're
mhm.
actually called and stuff. And I had a very progressive friend that was just like right there, and people were like appalled by it. And I followed suit with her because I'm pretty transparent myself. And so we talk openly the same way. It's not exactly the same way, but the same
Yep.
way is that we teach my daughter what swearing is, and that, you know, like I swear, but it's inappropriate for you in these settings because you're a child, and we explain it to her. And to be fair, she's 7, and I just had the consent, nobody touch you.
Mhm.
If you don't consent, let me know. Here's
Mhm.
what you do if this happens. Tell them you're sick.
Yeah.
Let me do whatever. And she seemed to understand it, but it was still sort of like I talked to her on her level, but that information's sort of higher level. So you just have to
Yeah.
like work it in. But to that point, like that's when we've started because now she's just starting to go to birthday parties in people's homes, and she
Mhm.
will be going to sleepovers in people's homes, right? And so I need to prepare her, right? Like who knows? And so
Yeah.
I gave her an out. We have a secret code and everything, right? And so we
Yeah.
made it her age friendly, but to this stuff as well, right? Like they need to, yeah, you need to educate properly and be open to have these conversations. But a lot of families aren't open to many conversations that are
No.
uncomfortable.
Do you remember Cami Collar from the Waltons?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Anybody? Yeah, so
yeah.
she was on the Siblings today as well because she's now an
Oh,
educator.
okay.
Her only acting was the Waltons. And I interviewed her for the podcast because when I was younger, the Waltons was a quintessential family, right?
Uh,
Your family either was the Waltons or you wanted it to be the Waltons, and that's how it was in the 70s.
I feel
And
like
so
mine was the Beverly Hillbillies. I don't know.
okay, yeah, yeah. Let's go there.
no, no.
But Cami Cotler, who played Elizabeth Walton, said to me that all through her life, that's what people have said to her. You know, either the Waltons were their family or they wanted it to be that family. But she came on to the Awareness Day as an educator in California, and we were talking about, can we talk about sibling sexual abuse in sex education curriculum? And of course, there are a number of obstacles to that because of the way sex education is designed and delivered in different jurisdictions, blah, 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 and all that sort of stuff. But something she said that was really important was, in the school system, parents often resist what's taught in sex education, but what they teach are facts. They teach facts of life, body parts, all of these sorts of things. There's no, there's just like they teach facts in math and they teach facts in social studies and all that sort of stuff. They're teaching the facts. The moral and value conversations are still up to the parents. And they are still, because parents will resist the school teaching any facts around sex education. So, and she's sort of saying, let us teach the facts and then you teach the morals and the values. And I think that quite often, I'm uncomfortable with some of the words I used when my stepdaughter was younger and she was asking me questions. It made me uncomfortable to do that. So I wish the school had done a better job. But when we were talking about morals and values, that was an easy conversation for me about, respecting other people and asking for people to respect you. Those sorts of conversations. I actually found that quite easy. But Nusrat Khan, again in India, the reason why I bring her up is because she emphasizes this is an every chance you get without making it overwhelming for yourself or the kids. you're winding in the conversations about morals and values and consent and things like that, even to the point, for example, of, and this is an example I remember from my own life. It seems flippant, but it's a good example. When you're tickling your kids and they're laughing and they're having a great old time and they say, stop, stop, stop. Generally speaking, you don't stop, right? You keep tickling the kids. When in actual fact, it's an ideal opportunity to stop and say, do you really want me to stop? This is your body. Yeah, I'm happy to keep tickling you if you want, but if you want me to, then I'll stop. Do you see what I mean? It's a consent conversation. And it's a really good
Yeah.
example. I actually shared that the other day with a friend, and she was like, "Oh my God, I never stop. When I'm tickling the kids or whatever, I never stop. They laugh and everything, and I never and she started doing it, and the kids were sometimes, actually, I need you to stop because, I just can't cope with it. And other times it's like, no, no, tickle me some more. Like it's like,
So,
so
so actually, Nancy, I want to ask you, it's a little bit about tickling, but the adult version of that. So what is absolutely shocking to me right now is that it happened to me when I was barely older than Eva, um, Amy's daughter,
Amy's
and
daughter.
I have had sex with some lovely human beings, truly,
Good for you. Yeah.
truly, and
Yep.
all of them knew
Yep.
about the fact that I was on Canada AM talking about, this stuff. Is there healing? Because, um, for example, what happened to me happened in the middle of the night. I was sleeping
Yep.
and I
Yep.
was the child at a sleepover and was woken up to this violent attack. Is there healing? Like,
Yes.
can you get over this shit?
You don't get over anything. You make friends with it and you understand how it fits in your life. I am who I am because of what happened to me, including the loss of my mother when I was 20, the abuse I endured from my brother, the negative sexual encounters I had when I was younger, because a lot of people who are abused go on to have sort of promiscuous lifestyles until they started square away until they square away their thinking. No, no, never, Kimothy, never. So,
Oh
you
no,
know
I
what?
totally did. I totally
I
did.
know, yeah, everybody,
I totally did, but I'm also still very good friends with some of those people because
sure.
I was able to articulate,
Yeah.
don't sneak up on me in the middle of the effing night, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this is where my
I will
boundaries.
hurt you. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like don't be sneaking up. But
Yeah.
I would like to think after everything that you've told us that there are some ways that we become responsible for our healing and that
Mhm.
we are able to communicate that to people that we care about.
The first thing in healing, in my experience, and many of the people that I've spoken to, is to not expect any of the healing to come from anybody else. So healing doesn't come from your sibling saying, I'm sorry.
Right.
It heals nothing. Because it just doesn't. The healing must come from within. And when we assume that responsibility to do that work, whether that involves forgiving oneself, forgiving other people or not, it's entirely up to you who you forgive. Whether or not it's about doing what I've done, which, I advocate. Part of my healing is the work that I do in the Siblings 2 project. Because I learn so much, and that's been helpful in my journey. Even before I started the project, I was, as a psychologist, I was reading about this sort of stuff, um, and that was really helpful. But healing, you don't get over, you move forward. And you make friends with it's been my experience is you make friends with all of the experiences of your life because of the work that I've chosen to do. The abuse that I endured from my brother is now just in the collection of experiences in my life. It doesn't have um, a wholly negative experience. Yeah, my husband does not wake me up in the night unless he's standing on the other side of the bedroom and he throws like a tennis ball at me or something.
Right?
Because,
Right?
like, yeah, it's like
That's
he
completely it. It's
knows.
like,
Yeah, he
I
knows.
need to be fully awake to know what I'm
Yeah,
consenting to. Do not like surprise me at 3 in the morning with, hey, I'm feeling amorous. Yeah.
yeah.
And to be able to articulate that, I think is really important
Hmm.
because don't we all come into our relationships with a little bit of baggage? And to be
Every
able
single
to
one of
sit
us.
down and say, this is my thing, and
Yep.
you must not do that, or I'm going to punch you in the head. Uh,
Yeah, but when you get it to the point where you're saying this is my thing, as much as don't tell this kind of joke in my presence, or don't, don't,
Yep.
is it something that one might consider more neutral, don't do that in my presence or whatever. It's all about boundaries. I think when we get really good at boundaries, we get really good at healing. So because
Ooh, that's good.
boundaries, write that one down, eh?
That's
It's like,
good. Yeah.
because it gives us the space to heal, it gives us permission to be who we need to be. I mean, I'm a different woman than I was 10 years ago, than I was 30 years ago, than I was 50 years ago, so and my boundaries have evolved, and my poor old husband has to do the dance of listening when they change, and these sorts of things. But it's boundaries, accepting that you get over nothing, you learn to make friends with it. I've learned to make friends with it. That this happened to me, it's part of who I am. You introduced me as this awesome person. I don't know if I live up to that, but you introduced me as this awesome person. Would I be this awesome without me, without the SSA part of me? Probably in a different way, but this is what I bring to the table now. So
So
I embrace what I
tell us
embrace it.
tell us how everybody can find this awesome person on social media, because I think they're going to want to know more from you.
Well, I appreciate that. Siblings 2 has a Facebook presence, so there's a
TOO,
TOO. Think
as
Me
in
Too.
as in the Me Too movement.
Yeah,
TO.
and that's where it got its name.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, it got its name. This is a wink to the Me Too movement, a movement that finally said we're not going to take this anymore. We need to be heard, and siblings need to be heard too in this context. So hashtag siblings too is
Love
my
it.
moniker, and that's what we go by. So yeah, siblings two on Facebook. There's a siblings two YouTube channel with videos from the awareness day. There's Siblings 2 Project on Instagram, and there's a siblings2.com website with links to all of these places as well. So that's how
And
people can find me.
and God love Amy, who every time I say, "Hey, we're gonna have this person on the show and we're gonna talk about," Amy's like, "Bring it on, bring it
I'm
on."
all about information sharing, and
Yeah.
that's what we do here. And Nancy, this has been an eye-opening conversation because I have not had that type of stuff in my life. I have all
Hmm.
sorts of other crap if you want to talk to
Yeah.
me otherwise. But I mean, it's eye-opening. And so I hope that, first of all, thank you for joining us today and being so open. And I hope that the people that are watching, if it's happened to them, have a little bit more to grab onto and start healing and
Yeah.
finding the direction. And if you think it's happening in your house between your children, here's some signs, here's some things that might be going on, start paying attention. And the point that you made about other people's traumas as parents, not kind of accepting or dealing with that, I feel like there's still a lot of that out there. And so,
Uh,
um,
Amy, can I add one more thing? So the guy that got me was an adult who was abusing his sister. I raised an only child female. Please be careful about where you let your children go for sleepovers, because that's what happened to me. So, I think that, we're like, oh, they're going over to, so and so's house and so for a sleepover. The only thing that I can bring to this conversation, having been a survivor of sexual abuse by a guy who is also abusing his sister, is just be really careful about where your children sleep.
Hmm. It's and even camping and things like that. We've got to
Right?
be mindful of
Yeah.
these sorts of things without being so hyper vigilant that we wrap children in, because that doesn't work either. But
Yeah.
I
100%.
totally agree with you that we need to be mindful of these things, because I do know of other instances where a child was harming their sibling who had a sleepover, and then that sibling also, that the friend of the sibling was harmed as well, because the person doing it may not fully comprehend that. What you're talking about, Kimothy, he was a young man who harmed, who assaulted, who abused you.
Yep.
So, one final thing I'd like to say too, just sort of adding on, is I always encourage people when I do a podcast or any sort of interview to, if there's a piece of what you've heard that you want to know more about, go and find out about that piece. There's lots of other websites out there and places that and there's more coming, around this topic, because the genie's out of the bottle now. And I think, Kimothy, a long time ago, I said to you, my mission is to make the genie so fat she doesn't go back in the bottle. Because sibling sexual abuse has been talked about before. 20 years ago it came out, but then it went quiet again. It went back in the bottle. Now it's so fat it's not going back in the bottle. Yay. One good reason to be overweight, Nancy. But the other thing I spoke to you a long time ago about, Kimothy, was who is the villain in these things? Who is a villain in sibling sexual abuse? Every movement needs a villain. It's not the sibling who causes harm. They aren't the villain. The media is not the villain. The parents aren't the villain. Definitely the person that was harmed is not the villain, etc. To me, the villain in the sibling sexual abuse story is a lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge by the parents about what might contribute to it. Lack of knowledge to the person being harmed that they are in fact being harmed, that this is not acceptable behavior, and lack of knowledge by the person causing the harm that the harm is not only harming, it's damaging. It's changing the course of life for not only the person you're doing it to, but to your own life as well. So for me, the villain in the sibling sexual abuse story is the knowledge, lack of knowledge. So go and educate yourself. Go and learn about this if you're a parent. Parents have opportunities now to learn that they didn't have before, particularly with the internet and stuff. So just go learn.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
hop from our podcast over to Nancy's podcast, learn some more, get in there and start doing some research. Nancy, we appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming on and discussing this. And until
Thank
the
you.
next time on the Inner Shift, we'll see you next time.